ashes, that old truck fires up. She's braiding her hair, I'm grabbing my hat off the nail. We pray right there in the gravel, then hit that cattle trail. Dust, bruising Jesus, that's the life that frees us. Farmers' tans and worn out hands, yeah, that's how he leads us. Campfire smoke on our clothes, hay in our hair, Lord, you see us. Cowboy hats tipped low, but our hearts are riding high on dust, bruises, and Jesus. We're chasing them calves through a sea of summer thorns. Spurs kicking up clay, sweat, salt stinging where it's worn. She laughs when I slip, face first in a muddy stall. Says, baby, grace ain't clean, it shows up in it all. Dust, bruising Jesus, that's the life that frees.
Whoa, I got a pile of paper there on my desk. I just realized that. Hey, good morning, everybody. Yeah, that's me. That's me getting ready for my taxes. Yeah, I'm running late. Usually I have my taxes done by now, but anyways, there we go. All right. We're going to go ahead and do that so I don't show my mess on my desk. Wow, I'm embarrassed a little bit. Good morning, everybody. Does that even mean good morning anymore? You know, today's show is about political words, and words have literally kind of lost their meaning. But you know what? I do mean that when I say good morning. Hope you guys are doing well today. So what are we going to do today? We're going to talk. What do these words even mean anymore? Conservative, Republican, Democrat, liberal, woke, MAGA, make America great again, good, evil, rhino, woke, conservative, liberal. Did I already say conservative, liberal? Justice, equality, populism, accountability, transparency, values, rights, safety. What does any of this stuff even mean anymore? You know, when I think about this journey that I've been on, and by the way, I'm Joseph Kibler. I'm your host, Beyond the Fence Line, where we go outside the echo chamber. We look at things we go outside of our comfort zone even, and we go into the truth. We just talk about the things the way they are. And so this is going to be an interesting show today because we're going to talk about words and meanings. And what is the solution? Because honestly, none of this stuff doesn't even mean anything anymore. Have you noticed you get into a conversation about politics or something, whether it's online or at work with your friends, even your family, and it feels like you're actually not talking about the same thing anymore? Yeah. You know, you can use the exact same words and walk away from the conversation and realize the other person meant two totally different things the entire time, right? Like what's going on with these words, you guys? You know, and it leaves you just sort of thinking, you know, what just happened? Because you didn't really disagree. The words don't mean anything anymore. You didn't go into the conversation trying to argue, but somehow you ended up on opposite sides without even really connecting with what's being said. You know what, guys? This is just confusion. We live in a culture and a political cycle where our leaders keep us confused. And words have lost their meaning and how we communicate them and the way they're communicated. And ideas are now distorted. So what happens is we lose a good conversation, right? Because when words don't have meanings anymore and we're constantly being divided, what do? It's dangerous. The truth is getting buried behind labels, right? We can't find it anymore. And by the way, that's what Beyond the Fence Line is all about. It's about finding that truth that's been buried behind the labels. You know, buried behind the headline. You know, I always appreciate Cowboy State Daily and their headlines that they put out on me. And, you know, throughout the last year, you know, their first headline for me was "Nobody's running for governor." I thought, oh, that's a pretty good idea. You know, but we don't get beyond the headlines because the articles are actually pretty good. The articles they've written about me, they've been pretty fair and equitable. But because the truth gets buried behind the labels and the headlines, it just keeps us divided without even realizing it's happening. And that is the language trap that we're living in now. So I think I got to start really. Is this I get at the lowest level possible, the highest level possible? I've got to start kind of where all this begins, and that is when the lines between what is good and what is evil gets blurred. And I think it's important I start this conversation with this before we get into the meaning of all these words, because the bottom line is that when, in fact, Isaiah 5:20 says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who exchange darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter," where we've flipped the meaning of words. And by the way, I think a good example of this is two words we hear a lot of: capitalism and socialism. Boy, how have we not flipped the meaning of those words in so many ways? You look at things like Trump accounts, and it's being touted as the most capitalist idea ever. No, it's just another government welfare program. Socialism, taking money from someone else and giving it to somebody else. But we're calling it capitalism, the greatest capitalist idea since sliced bread, when the opposite is actually true. It's just another government program cloaked, and it makes us feel nice. It's got a nice title. It's got a good purpose. But it's not what it appears to be. Same thing with conservatism and Republican and conservative and all these different words that we talk about. The script is flipped. We don't even know what these things mean anymore because we've redefined them from what their original purpose was. Okay, I digress. Let me get back to good versus evil here. This is kind of like the foundation part of it, right? Before political parties or ideologies, before movements, it's a basic understanding of what good and evil is. And today, even that has become unclear in our culture. What one group calls good, the other group calls evil, harmful, or offensive, maybe. What one group recognizes as evil, another group might justify it or make an excuse for it or even promote it. Is my caller okay? Okay, good. So when you start there, when even the most foundational concepts lose clarity, everything else just sort of starts to shift and move around, which is why we don't even know which way is up anymore. When it comes to American politics, culture, economy, education, you name it, we just don't even know anymore. And it's not this isn't just describing behavior anymore. It's describing a confusion at a level of truth itself. Like, we don't even know what the truth is anymore because we don't know what good and evil is anymore. And that's why I think I needed to talk about that first before we dive into this. Romans 12:21 says something that's kind of interesting. It says, "Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good." And what we see so much, oh, by the way, another word that's lost its meaning. What does the word Christian mean? And it ties into this verse I just mentioned. We see an awful lot of people naming, saying I'm a Christian, elect me because I'm a Christian. And it's just used as a catchphrase. It doesn't actually mean anything. And by the way, that's not a blanket statement. Not everybody is like that. And I don't want to cast that kind of just broad dispersion of judgment. But we don't see this Romans 12:21 where we overcome evil with good. We see people overcoming evil with more evil. And yet they call themselves Christians. And that's concerning when we see that going on. No wonder we can't figure out what the word Republican or conservative or Democrat or liberal or rhino or progressive conservative or whatever these other words that woke, these other words that we have, we don't even know what anything means anymore because the basic tenets of life don't even mean anything anymore. It's just like, yeah, it's a label, but it doesn't mean anything because you don't live it. You don't talk like it. You don't love it. Now, by the way, I'm not pretending to be perfect, but I try to live these things. And so today I'm going to talk. Was that an intro? I don't even know. Today we're going to talk about these words, but then we're So where do we go from here? Like, how do we cut through this noise of words that kind of have no meanings? And these labels, they, quite frankly, they lie. And it's sort of this collapse of political language. So let's talk about this labels thing. So we move into this labels thing, and we get, well, Joseph's unaffiliated. Joseph's a conservative. Joseph's a Republican. What is Joseph? Nobody even knows anymore. Does Joseph even know? Oh, I know where I stand, because guess what has never changed with me? Yeah, you might see a party change or something like that, but my principles have never changed. And we're going to talk about that in a little while. We're going to talk about the things that matter. And we've decided that political parties are the thing that matter. It matters more than anything when it comes to politics. It shouldn't. In fact, political parties should be that which matters the least. What it should be is character and principles and purpose and vision. Those things should be the things that matter. But no, we're focused on Republican, Democrat, R&D, and Constitution Party, whatever. So these sets of words used to have a general set of beliefs and philosophies that went around them, right? No, they weren't perfect, but they gave you like a starting point to understand who someone was. But now these words like Republican, Democrat, conservative, grassroots, liberal, far right, far left, and the list goes on, they're just really kind of filters. The moment someone hears a label, they immediately begin to make assumptions, and they think, oh, they already know what that person believes and what they stand for, and therefore there's no reason to even continue on unless they agree or disagree with that philosophy. But now those philosophies don't mean anything, and I think you guys are struggling with that like I am. There is this great political dissonance amongst us, this identity crisis, if you will. And by the way, maybe I'm a perfect example of that identity crisis in politics, going, what am I even anymore? Because none of these things mean anything anymore. It's like we have these principles that we say these things that are supposed to define us, but they're all optional if it's something we want. And I'll go back to that example of socialism and capitalism, or even how about populism, where we say we have these principles of capitalism unless it's socialism that we want, a type of so we'll relabel it, repackage it, and say, oh, look, capitalism. Well, no, we can't do that, but that's what we're doing on everything. What does make America great again or America first even mean anymore, guys? What does it even mean? We've exchanged it for populist global ideas, but we're calling it America first. That doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of things going on that don't make any sense to me. Maybe I'm getting distracted right now, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. That's great. Supposedly we have all these empty oil rigs coming to take our oil out of the Gulf of America. By the way, Trump just said the other day he thought about calling it the Gulf of Trump, but he decided that probably wouldn't go over pretty well. Well, maybe he was just joking. He probably was just joking about that. So you know that we use more oil than we produce in America, right? No, you didn't know that. So we do. So we're selling, if we're going to sell all of our oil out of the Gulf of America to these hundreds of tankers coming in, where do we get the oil for our gas? I guess our prices will go up because we're gonna buy all the oil from somewhere, and then we're gonna sell all the oil that we create. Anyway, that doesn't make any sense to me, and that kind of plays into what we're talking about today. It's like robbing Peter to pay Paul. I don't even know where that saying came from. Peter and Paul in the Bible. I don't know. I don't even know that. Anyway, so we've got this great confusion about things that are going on. But this is where the conversation breaks down, is because we're not actually willing to talk to each other because we think we already understand what that person is or what they stand for based on their label. And by the way, that label can mean any number of things now. So we won't have the conversation anymore. So it's interesting. Proverbs 18:13 says, he who answers a matter before he hears it, that's folly. Like, that doesn't make any sense to do that. So in other words, you open your mouth and I answer you before you finish talking. I'm working on that with my kids right now. where a lot of times my wife and I will be having a conversation, and then suddenly we've got a kid doing this. So we're teaching our kids, you got to hold our wrist if you want to talk, and then we'll let you interject when it's time. So there's just real confusion. And then we don't take the time to know. And then let's just say, in the case of me and my run for governor, that I stepped back from, as you guys know, for now. You just look at the label, whatever that label is, but you don't look past that to look at my principles, what I stand for, what my vision is, what the mission is, what the movement is. And as a result of that, well, Joseph's just this, and you label. This is so ineffective. And by the way, this is why we have problems with government. Because we just get the label and we don't look at what's in the ingredients. That's what we do. So you ask 10 different people to define some of these words, and you probably get 10 different answers. And they're not small differences either, guys. They're completely different interpretation. Let's go back to the American First thing. One person hears the American First thing, and you think about prioritizing national strength, sovereignty, and taking care of their own people. Another person hears it and interprets it differently. Now, I think most of us probably interpret this the same way, and we probably feel a little bit, teeny tiny bit disenfranchised right now about this whole America First thing, or Make America Great Again. Seems like we're just doing something else completely. And I think most of you probably agree with me on that. The same thing is happening with all of these other words, these ideas, socialism, capitalism, and it's all a trap. So where do we go from here? I'm so glad you asked, because that is really the question. People label Mr. Eric Barlow is running for governor, and they label him a rhino. I don't like that. It doesn't actually mean anything. A rhino is like a large, leathery creature that has, a horn or two, and, lives in Africa. Like, it doesn't mean anything, you guys. It doesn't mean anything. I use the word progressive conservative, where they're conservative on some things, but not conservative on other things. I'm not going to digress too far into that conversation today. What does it even mean? So where do we go from here? And what's the solution for this? This is where principles must guide us. This is where we've got to start having the conversation more about, who are you? What do you believe? And how does that work? In fact, I'm going to look up, while I'm talking, I'm going to look up a quick text that I sent over to the Cowboy State Daily, because I got a text the other day, and this was to Claire, because she wrote my recent article about me stepping back from the governor's race and stuff like this. And this is what I said to her. Let me get to it. Okay. This is what I said to her. I want to encourage you into something. Stop reporting politics the same old way. Instead of focusing so much on political parties and talking points, focus on actual people and their principles, what they stand for, who they are. Things that actually matter to people. Be a political breath of fresh air, like I'm trying to be. Be something different. That's what I was encouraging her to do, because it's like political parties, political talking points. Full stop. What about who Joseph is, or who Eric is, or who Megan is, or who Brent is, or who Chuck is, or who David is, or you go down the list. What about who these people actually are and their principles, so what they stand for? Do people know that I've run into burning buildings? I spent 20 years as a firefighter. I've run into burning buildings while everyone else is running out. Or that I've jumped over cliffs to rescue people. Rappelling over cliffs to extract people out of vehicles that have gone over the side. Do people know that I used to lead nature hikes? And I really like the outdoors. Do people know who we are and what the principles are? So the answer to this is we've got to stop using all of these meaningless political words, whether it's the word grassroots or conservative or Republican or Democrat, or you go down the list. We've got to stop groupthink labels. By the way, less labels is better because then we start having the conversation again. When we don't label each other, we can have the conversation. And by the way, that's why I'm able to have a conversation, because when someone reaches out to me, I don't label. For instance, maybe my friend Sarah, a liberal, woke, right, left-wing Democrat. I don't label her like that. I like her. I will sit down and have a conversation with her. We don't agree on everything. But I don't throw her into the bus of labels. Instead, I'm willing to treat her like a human being, like she deserves to be. Even though we don't agree on things, we don't have to label each other, and we can have the conversation, and we can walk away and at least have mutual respect for each other. Interesting. The Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among those life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those aren't just political words, those are foundational ideas. And we've gotten away from that because we don't see each other as equal. We see each other through the labels. Through the labels, by the way, which lie because they don't mean anything anymore. That's how we do it. So, the meaning of these words shifts depending on context, the agenda, the outcome that someone is trying to achieve. So the real issue isn't here that we disagree or agree or disagree. It's that we're not even starting from the same understanding, because these words, what do they mean? And it creates a cycle of confusion, frustration, and division, and we see it all over our culture. Here in Wyoming and beyond, people are just talking past each other. And in many ways they are, instead of to each other. So where do we go from here? So didn't I say that a little while ago? I guess I got just sidetracked by principles. We can't just throw up our hands and say, well, everything is broken and there's a path forward, but it requires something different from all of us. And what we really have to do is move beyond the labels, beyond the meaningless words. We need to start having the conversation. I've watched so many people since the tragic death of Charlie Kirk wander around this state, around this nation. I am Charlie Kirk. I'm going to have the conversation. Most of these folks weren't having the conversation before Charlie Kirk was killed. Most of these folks are not having the conversation now. They're just not. They're going to label you and push you to the side, or label you and bring you in if you label like they want you to be labeled. So instead of asking, what side are you on? We need to start asking, what do you believe and why? And hopefully you've seen this entire time since I was running for governor, even now in the show, you know what I believe and why. Not just what side am I on. In fact, you could probably tell I'm not on a side. I'm for the people. I like the people. All the people, even the people that disagree with me. So we need to slow the conversation down enough to perhaps define these terms again. What do they actually mean? We had a great problem with the definition of terms here in Wyoming in January when the Supreme Court decided to define abortion as healthcare. Elective abortion is not healthcare. The definition of healthcare, again, this is another meaning of words thing, right? Healthcare is the treatment and prevention of illness, injury, and disease. Well, I don't think pregnancy really falls under any of those, does it? But nonetheless, Supreme Court decided that elective abortion is healthcare. So we've redefined what this means. We don't want to know what this means anymore. So we need to slow down and define what these things mean again and then stick to it. But see, that's the problem. We say we're conservative. We don't like We don't like welfare unless it's welfare we want. We don't like subsidies unless it's subsidies we want. And the list goes on and on and on. And so these words don't mean anything. So we need to slow down, define these, but we need to do more than just define them. We need to live them, and they need to be consistent across the board. That's what we've got to do here. So that we make sure that you and I are actually talking about the same thing before we're debating it. We need to be willing to listen, not just respond, and to understand each other. Because the truth still matters, but it's how we communicate it when these words don't mean anything. So if we want to move forward, if we want real solutions, by the way, that's another issue, right? We keep getting Band-Aids for everything in our society and culture instead of actual solutions. Let's just throw another Band-Aid on it and hope it sticks this time. We have to start by rebuilding the conversation on something more than just labels. We need to rebuild on the truth, on principles that we share without labels. And I'll kind of wrap it up with this. We can't do something different unless we want to be something different. And being something different starts with how we think, how we speak, and how we choose to engage each other. And that's where it all begins. So as we wrap up the show today, I'm going to play the Code of the West as we go out today. I want you to think about this. If you removed all of the labels from your neighbors, what would you see? What would you see? Remove all the labels from me. Remove all the labels for the political candidates that are running. What would you see? If you walked into a room and I was a stranger, you've not labeled me yet, right? Well, you might. You might look at how I look, how I'm dressed, how my hair is, what type of clothes am I wearing. You might already pre-label me before you even shook my hand. But what if you walked into a room, you walked up to me with no label? What would you see? What would your conversation be? I think that's where we need to start. No more labels. Anyways, that wraps up today's show. Hope you guys have a great rest of the week. I got to go get ready for work. Rest of this week, we're going to dive into specifics on folks that are in Wyoming government that we need to replace here in 2026. We need good candidates, and I want to encourage you guys to step up to that. We're going to talk about Laramie County. We're going to talk about the state. And then on Friday, I'm going to talk about what I'm willing to do to help candidates who are going to stand up and fight the establishment. We've only got a month or so before you guys got to start registering if you're going to stay in the major parties or whatever. And I want to help you guys get elected, especially if you're fighting establishment candidates. With that, God bless you guys. Have a great Tuesday. I'll talk to you later. See you tomorrow. All right, let me fire up the Code of the West here for you guys. I like this song. It's a good song. Now I'm going to get out of here.
Sun comes up on a small town road, coffee in a thermos, steel-toe boots. You don't flinch when the wind blows cold. You just do what you're born to do. Calloused hands on a busted gate. Fix what's broke till it holds its weight. You don't cut corners, don't fake the shine. You see it through every single time. That's the code of the West. Stand tall, give your very best. Your word is the mark on your chest. You ride for your people, you don't forget. Some things you just can't buy, like a clean heart and a clear sky. Know where to draw that Shake a hand, that's a 90. Doesn't change with the way you feel. If you say you'll show, you'll be on time. Rain on the roof or a blue sky shine. You wear the name on your paycheck proud. Hold up the crew when the chips fall down. You don't brag big, you just get it done. Few words spoken, but you speak in tongues. That's the code of the West. Stand tall, give your very best. Your word is the mark on your chest. You ride for your people, you don't forget. Some things you just can't buy. Code of the West. You can't put a price on trust or sell your soul